Hello and welcome to the first step of our creative edit. We have a few steps in this lesson to go over, so let's go ahead and get started. What I want to do first is add some warmth to our image by adding some reds and some yellows, and we're going to do that non-destructively with adjustment layers. So the first thing we need to do is we need to add one of my favorite tools, which is the Curves tool. So to do that, we're going to scroll down here below the lowers panel. We're going to click on this icon and select Curves, and this will add an adjustment layer right above our image. Now the cool thing about this is we can come in and make our adjustments, save the file as a PSD file, and then come back at a later time and make adjustments to that particular edit. And this is how you work non-destructively, and this is what I recommend doing. So we're going to go ahead and warm up our image with some reds and yellows. Now at the beginning of this course I did have a basics section that went over some of the tools that we're going to go over, one of which was the Curves panel. And as you know, we can select different color channels through this menu right here. We have red, green, and blue. So first we need to select the red channel, and then from here if we drag this line up, we will add red to our image, and if we drag it down, that will apply green to our image. So since we want to add red, let's bring this back up. I wouldn't go too far, that's way too much. I'm just going to do a slight adjustment to right about there. Okay, so now that we've added the red, let's go ahead and add some yellow. We can do that with the blue channel. We know that if we drag it up, we add blue, and if we drag it down, we add yellow. So this is way too much, so I want to go ahead and just apply a small amount of yellow. So we're going to bring that up to right about there. And then if we go back to the RGB channel, we can see the red and the blue lines here and the adjustments that were made. Now let's take a look at the adjustment before it was applied, and we can do that by turning off the layer by clicking on this icon right here, and that's the original image. And once we turn it back on, we can see the adjustment made here. Now if you want to go back and make adjustments, which I do, I'm going to double click on this icon here. I want to add a little bit more red, so I'm going to go to the red channel and I'm going to drag this up, and I'm kind of dragging it up more towards the top portion up here because I want to add more red to the highlights versus the shadows. So I want to bring that up right about there. Now the other thing is it's kind of intense on the skin. I'm not liking how it looks on the skin, so I want to reduce this particular edit just in this area and some areas over here. And to do that, we can use our mask that was automatically applied to the adjustment layer. So if we click on this little white box here, you will see a highlight around that box, and you are now going to make edits using this particular mask. Now remember, we talked about this before. Black removes, white adds. So what we need to do is we need to select a brush, which is right here, or you can access it with the letter B. Once you have that, you need to make sure it's a soft brush, and I had the hardness set to 0%. The opacity I want to set at 25% to 50%. That's entirely up to you. If it's at 100%, it's going to remove all of that edit, and it doesn't look very natural because it doesn't have a gradual effect of removing that edit. It's all been removed. So I just want to remove portions of it, not all of it. So to do that, we need to drop the opacity down. So let's leave it at 25% for now. And then for your brush, if you want to make a larger brush, you can use your keyboard shortcuts, which are your bracket keys. The right bracket key will make it larger. The left bracket key will make it smaller. So make the brush about the size of the area that you want to apply it to. I'm going to use that brush size right there. And now when I click and drag it around the areas where I want to remove it from, it's only removing about 25% versus the 100% before. And you can see that the mask has a gray color on it versus black. Black is 100% removed. Gray is increments of the opacity that you're applying to the mask. And if I come back and release my mouse button and start applying again, well, it's going to remove another 25% in that area. and you can then see that it's a little bit darker in that area right there. I'm going to undo that with Command or Control and the letter Z because that was a little bit too much for my taste. And I think that's it. Let's take a look at the before and after. We toned it down in the skin. It's pretty intense around the rest of the image, which is the look I wanted to achieve. All right, so the next step is to add a gradient to our image, and that's going to increase the intensity of the sun as well as the color coming from the sun. So the first thing you need to do is create a new layer. The keyboard shortcut for that is Shift, Command, or Control, and the letter N. Hit Return or Enter on your keyboard, and then you have a new layer. Now the other thing that I like to do is I like to keep my individual layers organized by renaming that particular layer based on what I did for that particular edit, which is very handy because once you start adding more and more layers, it kind of gets a little confusing on which layer was which. So to change the name of that layer, we're just going to double click on the current name of that layer and give it a new name. Let's do the same for this layer here. Okay, so now we need to access our gradient tool, which is right here. If you don't see it, just click on the icon that's situated right here. It might be the paint bucket. You'll get this pop-out menu, and then you can select your gradient tool. And then you want to make sure your radial gradient is selected, which is the second icon. Then we need to add our colors, and we can do that from this color sampler box right here. Just click on it and you'll get a gradient editor, and then from here you can add your colors. So right now yours probably looks like this with two markers on each end. The first marker we want to make sure is white, so if it's not white, click on it, select color, select white, click OK. Then we want to add another marker right here. So just click anywhere in this area and you will get a new marker. Click color, and then we're going to add a new color. So I want an orange color, and I already have one picked out for this particular image. So I'm going to go ahead and apply it. Click OK. And then I want a nice red color for this end of the gradient. We're going to click on that, select color, hit your red, click OK, and you're all set. Now we're going to click OK and add the gradient. So to do that, we're going to come over to our sun and kind of find the middle of the sun. It doesn't have to be perfect. Click and drag out. You're going to get this little line here, and I'm going to come out to right about there. And then once I release the mouse button, we get our gradient. So we have our whites in the middle, orange to red. Okay, so the next step is to change the blending mode from normal to screen. Then we're going to adjust the opacity because this is way too intense for my taste. So we can use the opacity settings here, or we can use the keyboard shortcuts, which are the number keys on your keyboard. And if I press 5, this should change to 50%. And it didn't. So why didn't it do that? Well, that's because our gradient tool is selected. And when you use your keyboard shortcuts, it's changing the opacity for that particular tool. I'm going to press 0 to change that back to 100%. I'm going to press the letter V to get my move tool. And now I can use my keyboard shortcuts to change the opacity for this particular layer. I'm going to do 5 again for 50%. Still too much. Let's try 30 and 20. Actually, I think I want to change this back to 50%. And what we're going to do is remove this red because it's way too intense for me. But I do like how the color is in this area here. So to do that, we're going to apply a layer mask by clicking on this icon here. We can then remove portions of the edit or portions of the gradient fill in certain areas and keep it in other areas. So I'm going to press the letter B to get my brush. I'm going to use my right bracket key to increase it. And I think I want to add, and I think for opacity, I'm going to set it at 40%. So once I press the number 4 key, we can see the opacity change to 40% for the brush. And then with the black on the foreground, I will remove the red from the image. So I'm just going to click and start dragging in the areas where I don't want the red. So right in that area there. And I can click and remove a little bit more if I want to. And that's not something I want to do, so I'm going to undo that with Command or Control and the letter V. And now you can see the area where I applied the brush to remove the gradient from this particular area. I just want it mostly in the area where the sun is starting to set, and that's it. So that part of the edit is now done. The next thing we want to do is add a color fill. I want to introduce some blues into the image, and that's going to give it that hot intensity look that I'm after. So with a blue color fill overlay, it's going to add a little blue, and because we're mixing blue and red together, kind of gives it a more purple type look, which is what I'm after for that intensity. So the next step is adding a new fill layer. So go up to Layer, select New Fill Layer, Solid Color, click OK, and then we need to give it a bluish color. I already have one picked out, so I'm going to go ahead and apply it here. You can use these same numbers as well, or you can pick a different color of your choosing. And like I mentioned before, this is an adjustment layer, so you can come back and change the color of the blue at any time in case you want to try out something different. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Okay, now we need to change the blend mode from normal to lighten. And now we have a purplish type tint to the image. It's a little too intense, so I'm going to drop the opacity down to 50%. Okay, so now we have that nice warm reddish purplish type overtone to our image, which is what I wanted to achieve for this particular image. Now the thing is, it's just a little bit too red or a little too purple in this area, so I want to introduce some orange to this area, and I want to increase the intensity of the sun a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another gradient with the same colors or slightly different if you want, and we're going to increase the size of the sun as well. So the first thing we need to do is add a new layer, which is Shift and Command or Control and the letter N. Click OK. Go ahead and select your gradient tool. Click on the color sampler, and then from here, if you want to change the specific colors, you can do that. I think I'm going to leave them the way they are, but I want to narrow the gradient just a little bit, so I'm going to move this marker to the right just a little bit. Click OK, and then again, I'm going to find the center of the sun, and this time I'm going to drag out a lot farther than I did previously. I think before I stopped in this area. Now I'm going to come down to right about there. And if you want to change the width or the length of that gradient, you can always come back and click and add it again until you're happy with what you're trying to achieve. Alright, so now that we have that, we need to change the blending mode to screen. I'm going to select my move tool, and I'm going to lower the opacity down to 40%. Let's try 30. And there we go. Let's take a look at that before and after. Alright, so that's it for this part of our creative edit. In the next lesson, we are going to increase the contrast, make our image pop a little bit, and we're going to sharpen some parts of the image as well. Alright, so I'll see you in the next lesson.